Before we talk about the law, we have to begin with what every person in this courtroom already knows. What happened at Apalachee High School was tragic. It was horrific, it was terrifying, and it was heartbreaking. Nothing said in this courtroom can change that. Nothing that I'm going to say is meant to diminish that. You're going to hear emotional testimony, you'll see photographs, you'll see videos, you'll hear about the fear, the chaos, and the terror that Colt Gray inflicted on that school and this community. But your job is not to decide whether or not that was tragic. We all know that it was. Your job is to decide something much more specific. Your job is to decide whether or not Colin Gray knew what Colt was going to do. Because the state is not just prosecuting the shooter in this case, they're prosecuting the father as well. I want you to remember something as we begin. The courtroom is not a place where we punish people because we're angry, where we punish people because we're grieving. It's not a place where we punish people because we feel someone has to pay. This is a place where we follow the law. And the law requires proof, and the law requires evidence. And the law requires that the state prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. That burden never shifts, not for a single moment. The state's theory will be simple. They'll tell you that Colt Gray allowed his son access to firearms and ammunition. Colin Gray had warning signs, and then Colin Gray, knowing that these were warning signs, consciously disregarded those warning signs. That he should have known his son would, not could, that his son would harm someone. And because the son later committed this school shooting, therefore Colin Gray must be guilty, must be criminally negligent, because he knew this would happen. That's their theory. But what you'll learn from the evidence is that case is not that simple. The evidence will show a teenager who is struggling mentally, a teenager who is deceptive, a teenager who hid his true intentions from everyone, from his family, from his counselor, from his siblings, from DFACS, from law enforcement, and most especially from his father. The evidence will show a father who did not ignore his child. He did not abandon his child. He did not turn his back on his child. The evidence will show between Colin Gray and Colt Gray daily contact, daily effort, and active steps by Colin Gray to seek mental health intervention for his son through the school. The evidence will show that the most important facts, the planning of this shooting, the concealment of this shooting, and the timeline of this shooting were hidden by Colt Gray from his father. That's the difference between tragedy and criminal liability. And this case is about whether the state can prove criminal liability by showing that Colin Gray knew that Colt was going to do this, knew that Colt was going to harm someone else. You cannot hold someone criminally responsible for failing to predict what was intentionally hidden from them. You'll learn about Colt Gray's state of mind that at the time no one knew. You will learn that months before the shooting, Colt had notes hidden on his cell phone from April of 2024, private notes that appear to be the planning stages of this shooting. Those notes were not known to Colin Gray. Those notes were not shared with Colin Gray. There is no evidence of that. You will learn something else. The plans reflected in those notes show that the shooting was initially planned for February of 2025 to coincide with the anniversary of the Parkland High School shooting committed by Nicholas Cruz. The plan reflected in those notes was that that time was going to be when the shooting happened, not in September of 2024. Something changed. The evidence will suggest and support that Colt accelerated his plan. And there's evidence suggesting that that acceleration was tied to the fact that Colin Gray was actively seeking mental health treatment for his son through the school at that time. There are emails to the counselor. There was paperwork he filled out. There was already in motion, already in place, an appointment for Colt to meet with the counselor and to meet with the mental health specialist the very next day, September 5th. Colin Gray did not know about the plans. Colin Gray did not know that Colt was planning to do this and that he would in fact go harm someone else. The behavior that Colt exhibits, the behavior that you'll find from his notes in his cell phone, from his text messages, show that he was actively keeping this information from others, from law enforcement, from DFACs, from counselors, from professionals who know to look for these signs, and most especially from his dad. The state will point, and they've already mentioned to you, an incident in May of 2023 when 2 Jackson County sheriffs went to Mr. Gray's home to talk to Colt. Fortunately, this interaction is on body-worn camera video, so you'll get to see the whole episode. You will see that Colin Gray is cooperative. You'll see that he brings his son out. He tells the officers that he takes this kind of thing seriously. He tells the officers, you tell me that he did it and those guns are gone today. That is on video. That is undeniable. But the officers don't tell him that. The officers say that they're not sure that it was him that made the threat. He tells the officers that he has a gun in the home. He says that he has a son who is somewhat isolated, who's on the computer a lot. He says that when he was young, he used to enjoy hunting with his father, that they would go deer hunting. And so he was introducing Colt to deer hunting, that they had gone out a year before. Colt had killed his first deer, that the gun that they had was for deer hunting. The gun was to get him outside, which the officer in the video approves of. Get him away from the computers, that's good. But Colin tells the officers, if you think this is him, tell me, because those guns are gone today. And that is not what he's told. It shows that Colin, had he known, would have removed those guns. But he didn't. Let's talk about what Colin actually did, because this case is being framed as if Colin Gray didn't do anything. The evidence will show the opposite. You will hear that when the family transitioned schools, it was Colin Gray who registered Colt. You will hear that Colin Gray worked full-time, was raising 3 kids on his own due to the kids' mother's addiction problems, due to DFAC saying that she was not allowed to have unsupervised contact with him, due to the courts in Barrow County saying she was not even allowed in the same county where these kids lived. Colin was doing everything. Colin is the one that filled out the counseling referral forms. Colin is the one that communicated with the school counselor. Colin's the one who discussed the evaluation. Colin was the one who was coordinating mental health services through the school. Colin is the one that filled out the paperwork to get the assessment done on September the 5th. You'll hear that the school had arranged, and it had already been taken care of, that Colin had completed everything he needed to for the assessment. You're going to hear from the grandmother who says that they wanted to take him to Advantage Behavioral in Athens, that it was urgent. This comes out after the shooting. The grandmother will also tell you she had absolutely no idea that Colt had any interest in Nicholas Cruz or school shootings in general until after the shooting happened and they were making the 4.5-hour trip from Fitzgerald, her and her daughter Marcy, at which point Marcy said, well, Colt does like this school shooter named Nicholas Cruz. That's the first time that you hear Debbie learns any of that. You're going to see text messages from Debbie in August and September of 2024 when she says that they were so strongly trying to get him into a facility. What you're not going to see in those text messages is any urgency on Debbie's part. You're not going to see anything from Debbie saying, get the guns out of the house. You're not going to see anything from Debbie saying, I'm worried about Colt. We need to get him there today. Nothing. They don't talk about it at all. Debbie doesn't mention it one bit. Now, she mentions it in hindsight after the fact, and Marcy does the same thing. Who is Colin Gray? He's a working father raising 3 kids by himself. He had responsibilities. He had a job. He had a family to keep afloat. He had 2 other kids besides Colt. He was involved. You'll see his text messages to his children. You'll see his text messages to Colt. This is not a parent who's turning his back on what's going on right in front of him. Let's talk about what you're not going to hear. Because sometimes what you don't hear in a case like this is just important as what you do. Sometimes the absence of evidence tells you more than the evidence itself. You will not hear a text message where Colt says to his dad, I'm going to shoot a school. I'm bringing a gun tomorrow. I have a plan. I'm going to hurt someone. You won't see a single message like that. You will not hear that Colt ever told his father about the notes on his iPhone. You will not hear that Colt ever showed his father a plan. You will not hear that Colt told his father he was accelerating the plan. You will not hear that anyone called Colin Gray and said, your son is about to commit a shooting. You will not hear that law enforcement told him, your son made a credible threat. You will not hear a school official warned him his mental health treatment is imminent. He needs to see someone today. You will not hear anyone from DFACS told him, we have serious concerns that he's violent, that he's going to hurt someone else. You will not hear anyone say that they contacted the police on September 3rd and said there's a school shooting about to happen. You will not hear that Colin Gray encouraged violence. You will not hear that he glorified violence. You will not hear that he dismissed a specific credible threat. In fact, you'll hear something entirely different. You'll hear that Colt suffered from anxiety. You'll hear that Colt suffered from depression. You'll hear about his panic attacks. You'll hear that he didn't like going to school. These are serious issues, but these are not the same as homicidal ideations. These are not the same as suicidal ideations. These are not the same thing as proof of a probable school shooting. The state will ask you to connect dots after the fact using hindsight. Dots that became visible only after the shooting itself. But what you will not hear is evidence that at the time, Colin had sufficient warning that this outcome was probable. Not imaginable, not possible, but probable. That Colin knew that his son would harm someone else. You'll hear testimony from Colt Gray's counselor. And that's important because it gives you a professional's perspective on what was going on with Colt in the weeks leading up to the shooting. You will hear that Colt presented as a student suffering from anxiety and emotional instability, panic symptoms, an inability to function in class. And you'll hear something very important. You will hear that even the school counselor, a professional trained, did not perceive Colt as a threat. She described him as nice, respectful. That matters, because if a trained counselor did not perceive the imminent violence, then it's unreasonable to claim that the father should have seen it himself. You'll also hear testimony from her about how the father did in fact take steps to get him mental health treatment. The father was in communication with the counselor. The father submitted the paperwork. The father completed the referral, and the father was pursuing intervention. You'll hear the therapist was essentially scheduled to meet with Colt the very next day. The father was not ignoring the problem. Colin Gray was acting. They want you to hold him responsible because they don't think he was acting fast enough. You'll hear from his daughter, Colt's sister, Jenny Gray. Her testimony will corroborate the concealment that Colt was perpetrating on his family, on his dad. She'll testify that Colt was secretive, that he was constantly deleting and opening new accounts on Discord to avoid detection, that he was using usernames that were combinations of alphanumeric combinations. You'll find that he would not discuss, based on the statement that Jenny gave on September 4th of 2024, that he would not discuss school shootings or school shooters in front of his father. You will hear on the morning of the shooting, Colin Gray had already left home. You will hear that Colt, when he did discuss school shooters with Jenny, made her promise not to tell his dad. You'll hear that that morning on September the 4th, Colin Gray got up and took his youngest son, Coley Jr., to school, that he left before Jenny and Colt did to catch the bus. You will hear that Colt had to go and find the gun because it wasn't in his room, that he had to find the ammunition that wasn't in his room, and that he had to put them in his backpack, and that he had to conceal the rifle that stuck out of his backpack 18 to 24 inches with a poster board. And he put a hat on top of it. It proves concealment, it proves independent action, and that matters because it's consistent with what Colt had done the whole time, which was conceal this plan from his father. Remember, the state says that he knew. They said that he knew this was going to happen. That he knew, not that it was possible, that he knew Colt was going to go and harm someone else. But you can't consciously disregard a risk that you're not aware of. And you can't say something is probable when it's being hidden from you. You're going to see text message. They've already discussed some of the messages. We're going to discuss some of the other ones. And we're going to talk about why they matter. There are hundreds of text messages between Colin Gray and his son. These texts matter because they show the reality in real time of what was happening and what Colin would have thought and what Colin would have known at that time. Not now, but at that time. They also show what Colt chose not to disclose. You'll see a father checking on his son on a daily basis, checking on school attendance. Did you make it to school? How's your day going? How was your day? What are you doing after class? You'll see encouragement. I'm proud of you. I love you. You're a good young man. This is not an absent father. This is not a father not paying attention to his child. You'll see daily involvement. You'll see a father trying to keep a teenager engaged and connected to school. You'll see a father trying to build the confidence and self-esteem of his son. You will see this all in the text messages. You'll see their discussions about mental health, about depression, which is not homicidal ideation, about anxiety, which is not homicidal ideation, about anxiety, panic attacks, which are not homicidal ideation. You'll see a father trying to stabilize a situation at home. You will not see threats to harm other folks. You will not see threats to harm other people. You will not see, I'm going to shoot up the school, I'm bringing a gun, I have a plan, I'm going to harm someone. There needs to be proof that Colin Gray knew what Colt was going to do and knew that Colt was going to harm someone. The text messages show something else as well. They show that Colt was capable of living a double life. He could text his father, love you, and have a good day, while simultaneously writing plans on his phone about shooting up the school. He could talk about liking school. School was good. The kids here are mature, referring to the Apalachee High School. They gave me a nickname. The teacher said I'm the tech guy. And you'll hear Colin respond happily that his son seems to be finding his way for the first time in a while in school. He could talk, Colt, about school being good, about having a good day, and what they're going to have for dinner, while also planning on how to sneak a rifle into the school. That's not something a father can foresee. He asked about ammunition. You'll hear evidence that they went to the gun range. You'll hear evidence that he taught his son safety. You will not hear evidence that Colt requested ammunition because he was getting ready to do a school shooting. That conversation is not a threat. There's no mention of harming anyone else. There's no talk of a timeline. The state's going to ask you to interpret these ordinary messages with extraordinary hindsight. But the law does not allow hindsight convictions. You're tasked with determining what Colin Gray knew in the months leading up to the shooting. It requires proof of what he specifically knew at that time. You'll hear from the mother, Marcy Gray. She'll try to convince you that she warned everyone and no one listened. The evidence will show that she did not share the most important information she knew about Colt with Colin. You've already heard their relationship was not smooth. You heard that DFACS took the kids from her. You'll hear that they were separated. You'll hear that the kids had to come up here per the DFACS order. You'll hear that she drove up here. After telling her mother she was going to murder Colin, came up here, keyed his cars, got arrested, and then was told by the judge, you can't come back to Barrow County. You'll see evidence in text messages between Colt and his mom. You will see in these text messages Colt telling his mom prior to the shooting that he had created a Securus online profile that he was using by making up a fake age to try and get in contact with Nicholas Cruz in prison down in Florida. He will text her that he had emailed Nicholas Cruz a couple times, and he'd even put money on his commissary. Marcy's response is to ask him where he got the money. And he tells Marcy in a text message, I told Dad it was to buy a video game on Steam. To which Marcy responds with a laughing out loud emoji. Marcy knew that he had this interest in Nicholas Cruz, but she did not share it with Colin. Immediately after this conversation, you will not see a text message from Marcy to Colin say, hey, did you know he's been emailing a mass murderer in Florida? Did you know that he put money on this mass murderer's commissary account that he told you was for a video game? She doesn't share any of that with Colin. She keeps that to herself. She does not reply immediately after to Colin or tell him, hey, this is what's going on. We got to get the guns out of the house now. No, she responds with a laughing out loud emoji. That's how serious she took it. She didn't think anything was going to happen. Remember, the evidence will show that even she, with the information that he did not have, did not believe there was an imminent threat and did not believe that Colt would harm anyone else. She didn't call law enforcement. She didn't seek an emergency mental health evaluation. And you'll hear evidence that after the shooting, her conduct is inconsistent with what she tells the police. You'll hear evidence that even after the fact, she's still trying to assist him in contacting school shooters and amplifying his profile across true crime community websites. And that matters because credibility matters and bias matters. You will see that the state is asking you to convict Colin largely based on a hindsight narrative provided by witnesses who are not credible, that did not recognize the warning signs in real time. You will hear from the victims in this case. Their testimony will be emotional. And it's important to understand what happened inside that school. But respectfully, their testimony will not establish what Colin Gray knew and didn't know. They can't tell you what was said in the home. They can't tell you what was concealed. They can't tell you what was sent in text messages. And they can't tell you what warnings were communicated to Colin Gray. We're not going to dispute the horror of what happened. We're not going to dispute that they were harmed, that they were physically harmed and mentally harmed. But that's not proof that he was negligent. That is not proof that he knew what was in Colt's heart, that he knew what Colt was planning, and that he knew that Colt was going to harm someone else. The law doesn't punish what is possible. The law does not punish what is conceivable. He is charged with knowing what would happen. He is charged with knowing his son would harm someone else. In life, almost anything is possible. It's possible that a teenager who's angry might get into a fight. It's possible that a teenager who's depressed might run away or make up excuses not to go to school. It's possible that a teenager who's anxious might break something or act out. But this is not a case about whether something bad is possible. This is a case about whether or not Colin Gray knew Colt was going to take a gun to that school and harm other people. That matters, because if the standard becomes it could have happened, then the law becomes limitless. If the standard becomes you should have imagined the worst, then every parent becomes criminally liable for what a teenager might do. But that's not the standard. The standard is proof. Proof that Colin Gray knew, that he consciously disregarded, not a vague fear, not a general worry, but a risk that made this tragedy. That he knew Colt was going to go to that school. That he knew what the counselor didn't, what the DFACS professionals who had met with Colt didn't. The state will ask you to look at the outcome and then work backward to say because this happened, it must have been foreseeable. But the law doesn't allow hindsight to substitute for evidence. That's why you're going to hear about what was actually known at that time, and most importantly, what was actually hidden from Colin Gray at that time. Because when someone conceals a plan, deceives the people around them, acts independently, the law does not allow us to pretend that the people left behind should have seen through all of it. They're going to say that common sense means you should have seen this coming. And guns are serious, and this tragedy is serious. But the law is serious too. This case is not about whether or not firearms are dangerous in the abstract. It's about whether Colin Gray, based upon what he actually knew, failed to act because he knew that his son was going to go to that school and commit these acts. In a case like this, there's a natural human instinct. When something this awful happens, we want an explanation. We want someone to blame. We want a story that makes sense so that we can take steps to make sure something like this never happens again. It's very easy and it's very human to look at the end result and believe that someone, somewhere, must have known. But the evidence in this case is going to show something that's deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes the truth is that the person who committed the act was hiding it. Sometimes the truth is that a family can be struggling, a child can be spiraling, and people can try to get that child mental health help and still something unthinkable can happen. It's not satisfying and it doesn't give anyone peace. But the criminal courtroom is not here to provide a scapegoat. It's here to provide justice. Being a juror, providing justice, that requires discipline. It requires that we do not convict someone because we're horrified. It requires that we do not convict someone because we wish they would have seen it coming. It requires that we do not convict someone because we feel like there must be some accountability somewhere. The state has chosen to put the father on trial for what the son did. And at the end of this case, you'll be asked to decide whether the state has proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Colin Gray knew his son would go to that school and commit these violent acts. And at the end of this trial, you will find the state cannot prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, and we will ask you to return the only verdict that the evidence can support, which is not guilty on all counts for Colin Gray. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before the first witness is called, I'm going to go ahead and take a 10 to 15 minute restroom break.